Set in Europe, the film introduces us to Virgil Oldman, the renowned director of one of the region's most important auction houses. As an art expert, this elderly man offers a didactic show of great quality to his clients, though he doesn't feel comfortable with any of them. Everything he does is for work, and there are very few people in his lonely life that he truly cares about. Even so, he can't help but treat himself to a pleasant evening at a wealthy restaurant for his birthday. It was a plan by himself and for himself, yet the diners recognize him, and the staff sends him a complimentary dessert. Far from showing gratitude, Virgil watches as the candle, meant for him to blow out, burns out slowly. Later in his office, he encounters a massive number of gifts from his fans, accepting them all except for cell phones, since he suffers from OCD. That's why he always uses gloves. At that moment, he receives a call from a certain Claire Iveton, and a social woman asking for help. In response, Virgil makes it clear that she's gotten the wrong number, although she apologizes for not explaining herself better. It turns out her parents died recently, and she inherited from them a large collection of antiques that must be appraised by an expert. Virgil has assistants who handle those tasks, but the woman insists that it be him personally because it was her father's last wish. Filled with intrigue, the elderly man decides to visit Claire's villa, which looks completely abandoned. Virgil uses a handkerchief to try opening the gate, but a heavy rain frustrates his plans. Later on, he visits his only friend Billy, who usually helps him at auctions to buy very expensive works for a low price. Despite their friendly and business-like relationship, Billy asks him to give his own paintings a chance, although Virgil points out that his art lacks depth. Speaking of paintings, the protagonist has a secret room filled with paintings that share one common thread. All of them are portraits of beautiful women. He usually sits and gazes at them to cope with his lonely life. When Claire calls again, Virgil says he won't help her anymore because she left him waiting in the rain. By way of defense, she claims that she tried to call him, or, well, tried to get his personal phone number, something he doesn't have. Out of her desperation, he decides to give her a second chance. When the time comes, he's received at the villa by Fred, Claire's concierge, who says she can't come out of her room due to a fever. Fortunately, Fred knows the house like the back of his hand and gives Virgil a tour of the enormous art collection owned by the late Mr. and Mrs. Iveton. In the basement, Virgil finds something out of place, some gears that he decides to keep. These gears leave him confused because he's never seen anything like them until now. His inspection is interrupted by a client's arrival. Virgil must deliver an apparatus to her. He refuses to accept money in exchange. Only a kiss. Quite the ladies' man. Quite the opposite of the surly Virgil, who sticks to his role as a mere observer. Back at Claire's house, Virgil brings along a lot of assistants to inventory the entire collection. Supposedly, the owner should show up to sign the contract, but time goes by and there's no sign of her. In the basement, he finds even more gears that weren't there before. That discovery has to be put aside for the moment because he receives a call from Claire informing him that she's at the police station reporting her car stolen. Tired of excuses, the protagonist starts questioning her until she yells at him in annoyance. Her shout is heard throughout the hallway, revealing that she's actually locked in her room and has lied to Virgil. Consequently, she asks him to call back later to explain. Virgil kills time in Robert's workshop, where Robert notices that the gears are older than he thought, specifically from the 17th century, with the name Jack Banson inscribed, a famous automaton builder. It seems that these gears were part of his most famous automaton, which could talk. Afterwards, the protagonist meets with Fred, who confesses that until now, he's only heard Claire. He's never actually seen her. By the time Virgil talks to Claire again, he's ready to hear her out and solve the mystery, but she tells him she no longer needs his services and abruptly hangs up. After days of bitter intrigue, his secretary tells him that Claire has summoned him again. Once at the villa, the woman speaks to him from behind a wall, confessing that she suffers from severe agoraphobia. She's terrified of being exposed to the world, and she hasn't left home for 12 years. Still, she won't let that sabotage her business arrangement with Virgil, whom she asks to continue appraising her collection. As the work progresses, the old man finds more gears that could potentially reconstruct the famous automaton. Meanwhile, Claire passes him the signed contract through the wall, along with her passport featuring a childhood photo. Yes, it expired long ago, but personal data never expires, so the contract can still be completed. When returning the document, Virgil manages to see the woman's eye through a small hole. She pulls away immediately and complains that he dyes his hair, something that offends the old man, who wonders how someone who never shows her face dares judge him. On his way out, Fred intercepts him to hand over the house keys, since his services as a concierge are no longer needed, while Virgil must continue taking inventory. However, the elderly man senses there's more to this decision, so he tells Robert about the situation, hoping that, with his extensive experience with women, Robert can offer valuable advice. Following his suggestions, Virgil stops dyeing his hair and soon gets a call from Claire, who has seen him on television and thinks his new style will be a hit with the ladies. The old man ponders that comment for several days without any further word from her. Since Fred is sick and can't bring her food, Virgil takes on that responsibility and finds a bloody handkerchief. He immediately goes to the wall of Claire's room, where she confesses that she had a fall. Despite her agoraphobia, the old man starts kicking the wall to get to her and take her to a hospital, but eventually gives up. In search of ways to stay in touch with Claire, Virgil asks Robert to teach him how to use a smartphone. Thanks to that, he can talk to her at all hours. She's now unsure whether she wants to sell the collection. On one hand, she wants to sell the house, but is terrified at the thought of moving, since it means exposing herself to the outside. So Virgil promises to wait as long as necessary. Out of gratitude, she asks him to stop calling her by her last name and to start using tú, the informal you in Spanish. After another visit to the villa, the protagonist pretends to leave so that Claire will come out of her room. From behind a statue, he finally sees her in person for the first time. Despite her reclusive appearance, she's a very beautiful woman. When he calls her phone, he forces her to return to her room, keeping her occupied long enough for him to leave unnoticed. Days later, Claire's birthday arrives, so Virgil decides to bring her a bouquet of flowers. She only complains about the low price for which her collection was valued, calling him a swindler. As we know, the auctioneer doesn't respond well to criticism. Later, she calls him to apologize, admitting that no one had ever given her flowers before. Her birthdays had always been terrible, although Virgil has brought light into her life. After another appointment at the villa, the protagonist repeats the same trick of pretending to leave so he can spy on Claire. This time, he drops his phone by accident, causing her to panic and lock herself in her room. No sooner does he leave the house than Virgil gets a call from Claire, who believes a thief is stalking her. Summoning his courage, the old man returns to the room to confess that he was the one spying on her. Of course, she doesn't take it well and yells that she never wants to see him again. Nevertheless, seconds later, she comes out of her hiding place and officially reveals herself to him. He caresses her gently so as not to frighten her any more than she already is. He then meets Robert to talk about his progress. Speaking of which, the automaton is slowly taking shape and looks poised to be the discovery of the decade. The inventor advises him to start treating Claire like a woman and not like a patient. As a result, Virgil gives her various dresses, a new experience for her, even though she looks great in them. As a sign of trust, she allows Virgil to zip up one of them. The old man also brings her makeup, but Claire sees it as a dirty trick to reintroduce her into society and thus take her to auctions full of people she doesn't care about. By way of apology, Virgil sets up a dinner in the privacy of her living room, for which she thanks him with a shy kiss on the cheek. While they chat peacefully, Robert spies on them from behind the statue, as Virgil wants him to witness the dinner. And indeed, he's impressed. Virgil proves to be a natural charmer, captivating the woman with the story of his life. After dinner, Robert jokes with him that he could have won Claire's heart if it weren't for her condition. Virgil takes it in stride until Robert's girlfriend, Sarah, reveals that he hasn't stopped talking about some Claire. The old man demands that the inventor hand over the automaton to one of his assistants, after which he'll be paid. When Robert asks for an explanation, Virgil claims that he doesn't trust him as a friend. On his next visit to the villa, Claire allows him into her room, where she kisses him for the first time. However, he focuses more on a tin toy collection that seems to belong to the automaton. That forces him to contact Robert, who returns the initial payment. He never intended to rebuild the automaton for the money. Later, Virgil returns to the villa as usual, but there's no trace of Claire beyond the open garden door. Immediately, he heads to the nearby bar, where they inform him they saw a pale woman leaving that place. Consequently, Virgil searches for her in the nearby park, together with Fred and Robert. While they continue searching, the old man must lead an auction, where he drops a ring he planned to give Claire. This, along with his anxious demeanor, makes him the laughingstock of the wealthy attendees, as his friend Billy watches with concern. In private, Billy points out that maybe Claire left of her own accord. As with paintings, human emotions can be faked, especially love. Even so, the auctioneer goes back to the villa looking for more secret rooms, eventually finding one in the attic. Thankfully, Claire is there, crouched in a corner, convinced that she's been abandoned as in the past. Then she confesses to Virgil that as a teenager, she fell in love with an older man during a vacation in Prague. Their romance was wonderful until they were hit by a car during a walk. When she woke up, her boyfriend was gone, so she locked herself inside her home and never went out again. As solace, Virgil spends the night with her, having his first intimate experience. When Robert hears about this, he enthusiastically congratulates him, and Virgil replies that he had a great teacher. That night, on his way to the villa, the protagonist is beaten by a gang of thieves. After the attack, he calls Claire for help, and she immediately steps out of her safe place to take him to the hospital, without seeming troubled by the presence of other people. Judging by Virgil's smile, perhaps that robbery wasn't as random as it seemed. Later on, he invites her to his house to show her his collection of paintings, those women who had accompanied him until Claire's arrival. What better moment to ask her to move in with him? She gladly accepts and says, "I love you," for the first time. Then in a wealthy restaurant, Virgil shows her the catalog of her parents' collection. She admits she no longer wants to sell and would like to keep everything as a remembrance. Without a second thought, he rips the catalog to pieces. Her wish is his command. In the next scene, the protagonist leads the final auction of his career in London, receiving applause and cheers from the crowd. He even hugs his friend Billy, and if you notice carefully, he's no longer wearing gloves. Billy then tells him he'll send him his last painting as a reminder of the great artist he might have been if only he'd gotten an opportunity. Virgil laughs and promises not to burn it. Back at his home, he can't find Claire, as his assistant informs him that she went out with Robert and Sarah. He takes it in stride and heads to his secret room to store Claire's mother's painting. Surprise! All the paintings have been stolen. The only thing left is the rebuilt automaton, which plays a message from Robert. There's something genuine in every forgery. They'd been deceiving him all along. Desperate, Virgil rushes to the villa, only to find the doors locked. At the nearby bar, he meets the real owner of the mansion, Claire, a little person who often visits that place and whom he had ignored until now. She reveals that she doesn't know what to do with the villa, so for the last 2 years she's been renting it to a handsome engineer. Moreover, she recalls that over the last 18 months, the mansion's contents were moved 3 times, and a blonde woman used to leave the place after Virgil departed. Back at his house, Virgil discovers a note on the back of the painting of Claire's mother, a message addressed to him from Billy. This is what happens when you don't give a chance to someone with talent. Virgil considers reporting the matter to the police, but knowing he acquired his painting collection through legal loopholes, he decides otherwise. After months of convalescence in a psychiatric institute, the old man travels to Prague to visit the restaurant Claire mentioned, the one where she was truly happy once. There he sits surrounded by gears and clocks, suggesting the workings of an automaton just like his own life. A waiter approaches and asks if he'll be dining alone, to which Virgil replies he's waiting for someone. But as the camera pulls away, we see he's the only patron, completely alone.
If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.